are excited about being here today. And we have a lot of people traveling, but we still, I see, have a lot of people that missed the bus. And you're still with us, and we're glad that you're here and appreciate your presence. I want to talk about a home dedicated to God. You know, one of the things that all of us that have children constantly are concerned about is the faith that we have instilled in the hearts of our children. I thank the Lord that all of my kids are right here except for Rusty, and he's on the mission field doing great work in Ecuador. So I'm not concerned about what he's doing to teach his children. And we have, I think, all of our kids dedicated to the mission that we have right here where we are, and participants. And it's just a joy. It's a great joy and satisfaction. In 1 Timothy 3 and verse 15, the Bible says that the church is the household of God. That means it's his family, his children. And as you go over to 1 John 3, you see that there's a long description of what it is to be a child of God and what God expects of his children. And he wants his family to be blessed. He wants his family to be obedient to him. He wants to know that they're secure. Danny's not here today. He's down in suffering in Cozumel, Mexico. That's supposed to be a joke. And I was very jealous when I saw the scenes where they are right now, down near the beach and the warmth there. But, you know, I know that I can pray to my Heavenly Father, ask him to take care of Danny and Layton while they're down there, and he will do so, that he will bless my children that are here, and that he will bless all of his children who we are. We are his kids. We're his children. We're the ones that he's concerned about. And we want to be sure that we do everything we can to make him happy. And it makes him happy knowing that his children are well and that they're all serving him and not being deceived by Satan and being destroyed by the devil. As we go into the scriptures, I want to look at some wonderful stories in the Bible that we need to change here. Right? Just a little more volume or a little less? More? Okay. In Joshua 24:15, we find that the man who had taken the place of Moses, you know, Moses brought the Jewish people out of captivity in Egypt, and the one that took his place was Joshua, and Joshua continued on with that mission. And as he's getting near the end of his life, he's concerned about whether or not God's children are going to remain faithful, whether or not they're going to serve God as they should. They're going through a lot of lands where people don't worship God, don't believe in God. They believe in false gods, and they have many, many choices amongst the many deities that they design with their own hands. And you find that Joshua's a little worried about God's children, that he has the responsibility of serving. And so he says to them, but if serving the Lord seems undesirable to you, then choose for yourself this day whom you will serve, whether the gods your ancestors served beyond the Euphrates, that's over one of the rivers there in the Holy Land, or the gods of the Amorites, in whose land you're now living. But as for me and my household, in other words, my family, as for me and my household, we will serve the Lord. And so he says, you know, every family has to make its choices, and every leader in the family has to try to direct his children the way he wants them to go. And God has done the same. He has told us what he wants us to do, who he wants us to be, and we're his children, we're his family. And he's concerned about us, and he wants us to be faithful to him and trust him, serve him. And so that's what Joshua says. He says, God's concerned about his family. You're his family, and he wants you to be obedient to him and to trust him, serve him. We want to have a wonderful family, a happy family, a family that's safe from Satan and all of his evil ways. And then as you go over to 2 Kings chapter 4, verse 8 through 10, we read another story that calls to our attention the importance of being aware of the needs of our children and meeting those needs. And I know that Amanda and Port are glad that their boys are well now, and that they did get real sick from what the boys brought home from school as a Mother's Day gift to Amanda. We're glad they're here and healthy and over the COVID, and we always want to be sure that everybody in our family is doing well. And so in 2 Kings chapter 4, we read about Elisha. Elisha was one of the prophets of God. He had worked with Elijah and replaced Elijah as the principal prophet among the Israelites. And he went down to the city of Shunem. And a well-to-do woman, meaning a woman who had a lot of money, was fixed financially, was there, who urged him to stay for a meal. Eat with us. You can stay for dinner, can't you? And so Elisha accepts the invitation. Every preacher gets invited to have fried chicken at somebody's house. I don't know what they served him that day, but I enjoy being able to go out and be in the homes of the members of the church and eat with them. The COVID-19, which I'll mention several times probably today, kind of has interrupted our ability to be with all the members of the church all the time and eating with them. But this lady invites the prophet to come and eat with her, and he's free and can do it, and he does it. So whenever he came by, he stopped there to eat. And you see, that's kind of like when you pick up a stray dog and give him food. People tell you not to do that, because if you do, he'll keep coming back wanting more food. And preachers are kind of like that. You know, you take them home, you feed them, and sure enough, they'll be back next Sunday hoping to get something else. And so he stopped there to eat. She fed him. He came back and continued to come. And she said to her husband, I know that this man who often comes our way is a holy man of God. He's not just anybody that comes down the street. This is a special man. Let's make a small room on the roof and put in it a bed, a table, a chair, a lamp for him. Let's fix him a little place that when he comes in, not just eats with us, but if he's tired, worked hard, he can stay and sleep, spend the night, and feel comfortable because of in his own room. And the houses back then all had flat roofs practically. That's how they were constructed in Israel. And so it was easy just to mount another little room right there on the top, on the roof. And that's what they did. Let's make a small room on the roof and put in a bed, a table, a chair, and a lamp for him. Not a whole lot of stuff, but enough. If you're tired, you come and you get a free meal, and then all of a sudden you have a place to go take a nap. That's nice. Then he can stay there whenever he comes to us. You know, this was a wonderful family, and they had been blessed by God, and they recognized that this man was a prophet, a man of God, and they wanted to do the right thing by him. And so we can feed him when he comes down the road, when he's over here working in our town. We can give him a place to sleep if he wants to spend the night, because I'm sure many times he travels on foot and he's probably very tired. Let's do that. And so you see that this family that had respect for God was also concerned about taking care of God's servants. And so this prophet, Elisha, is blessed by this Shunammite woman and her husband and their children. And I say their children because she didn't have any children, but because of what happened here, Elisha decided to help her out. And so he pleaded to the Father, and the Father granted her the possibility of being a mother, conceiving and having a child, having a son. And then later in life, when that child was injured and hurt and looked like he was going to die, seemed to have died, it is the prophet Elisha who comes and rescues that little boy and brings him back to life. So there's an awful lot in the story that's beautiful, but what I want you to capture is that this was a family that was concerned about the prophet of God and wanting to do the right thing by him. A family that was dedicated to God. Joshua says, I don't care who you serve in your family. I'm going to make sure my family serves the only true living God, the creator of the universe. That's what we're going to do. That's what we have decided as a family. It's a family dedicated to God. And now here we find another family dedicated to God that's saying, this puppet keeps coming down the street. He looks hungry, he looks tired. Let's do something for him in the name of our God. And then as you go over to the New Testament again, you see Luke chapter 2, 41 and 42, where Jesus is with his parents. They're going up to Jerusalem. He had parents, and his parents were worried about him too. They were concerned about him. They wanted to make sure that he got the training that he should get, the religious guidance that he needed. And when he was 12 years old, they went up to the festival. They went up to celebrate the Passover in Jerusalem. And that it says, according to the custom. That was the custom of the people of Israel. That was a law that had been given to them. And all of the males that were adults were obligated 3 times a year to go into the city of Jerusalem and participate in these different festivals. And so the parents of Jesus, who had been handpicked by God, Gabriel announced to them that Jesus was going to be born. And the reason that Joseph and Mary were chosen was because they were good people. And Jesus was born into a good family. And we later see that his mother and his brothers follow him where he goes in his ministry. And when it's time for him to make that ultimate sacrifice on the cross, we see that his mom is there. A good family, a wonderful family. The only family that Jehovah God could possibly use to put his son here on this earth and to let him be flesh and blood, live and die. And so a good family was picked, and they behaved like a good family. They went up to Jerusalem. They went to the feast day, and they did what they were supposed to do. And then we find that Jesus had many friends in his lifetime. When he wanted to have some fellowship, he had no problem. Not just his own disciples who were working with him. That was a working relationship, and they were brothers, and they were very much concerned about each other, dedicated to the mission they were all on. But Jesus had his friends that were just friends as well, Mary, Martha, and Lazarus. And as Jesus and his disciples were on their way, he came to a village where a woman named Martha opened her home to him. And again, we're getting back to what I'm trying to stress today. The home was open to him, and he was welcomed there. This was a house dedicated to God, and this was an opportunity for servants of God to do something for the Lord. And so she opened her house to Jesus. She had a sister called Mary who sat at the Lord's feet listening to what he said. And they treated him nice. He had a message to deliver to the world, and he got his opportunity when he was in their house, because Mary came and sat at his feet. And it was just all wrapped up in what Jesus was saying. That had to be a lot of fun. It had to be a good day. He preached all over the place. He preached to thousands of people at a time, fed thousands at a time. But this is just a quiet moment in the house of some friendly people, godly people, a family dedicated to God. And as a result, Jesus could enjoy himself. And she had a sister named Mary who sat at the Lord's feet listening to what he said. But Martha was distracted by all the preparations. While Mary was listening, Martha was out back shaking all of the food up and rattling the pans and making noise and sweating out there in that smoky kitchen that they always detached from the main house. So if the kitchen caught on fire and burned down, that would be all you'd lose, not the whole house. And so she's out there in the heat and getting sweaty and dirty and trying to fix a meal for Jesus. That's a nice thing to do. But Martha was distracted by all the preparations that had to be made. Food has to be made. You have to eat. Kelly tells me that all the time. And it's true. She came to him and asked, Lord, don't you care that my sister has left me to do the work by myself? Tell her to help me. I need some help in the kitchen, please. And then she had asked Jesus, don't you care? And he responded to say, Martha, Martha, the Lord answered, you're worried. And that's the same word You're worried. You care too much. You are worried and upset about many things. And so they were a family. All of these three people became very dear friends to his. Matter of fact, when the brother, who's not mentioned in this context, passes away, he lets him die. He stays back. You say, well, what kind of friend was that? They take you in the house, they feed you, they give you a place to sleep, and then what do? You let Lazarus just die, whatever it was that he had. And you don't come to rescue him. Jesus deliberately did not come. He told his disciples that he wasn't going to go. He wanted to let Lazarus die because he was going to raise him from the dead. It'd be one of the greatest miracles of Jesus Christ, and it would be performed on somebody that loved him, treated him well, had been good to him, and he wanted to let Lazarus be the one who would be raised from the dead, evidence that Jesus was the Son of God. And so we have a family here that was dedicated to God. The family, as a family, was dedicated to God. And then in Matthew 10, verse 11, Jesus is going to send out the 12 disciples, his apostles, on a mission. Go preach. Go first to the Jews, and then later we'll get to the Gentiles. But right now, let's concentrate on the children of Israel. Let's go to the lost sheep of Israel. And so he sends them out, but he says, whatever town or village you enter, search there for some worthy person and stay at their house until you leave. When you get there, start asking around town. Who would you consider to be one of the more faithful servants of God here in your community? And speaking to the Jewish people, they would know what he was asking, understand what he wanted to know. And they'd say, well, I guess you'd be talking about. And they would tell him who they consider to be a really faithful servant of the Lord in that community. And then they would go there and ask if they could stay. You know, I did something similar to that many times. I found out it was a great way to get to know people very well. I went into the island of St. Kitts, a small island in the northern part of the Caribbean on one occasion. I was dead broke. I think I had a total of $10. And when I got there, I was asked by the taxi drivers, taxi. And I had to tell them, I said, yes, I need a taxi. Oh, great, here's my car. I said, but you got a problem. I don't have any money to pay you, but I do need to go into town. I'm planning on having a gospel meeting, as we called it, a campaign, a crusade, and just me. They're going to do it downtown. And that's a long story. I can't tell you all the details, but it was unbelievable what happened. And he said, well, what can I do for you? I said, you can just drive me to town, and you can take me to one of the homes of one of these families that receive small children, like Aiden back there in the back, our visitor for today. Small Aiden, hold your hand up, brother, and see you. We can't see him. He's out. Well, I can't see him either. He's gone. but he's just a little boy. But oh yeah, okay. I decided that I would try and find some family that took care of these little children, and they would charge $1 a week or $2 a week or something like that. I thought, well, I can afford that. That's what I need. And so I had this taxi driver take me to a house. He got out, and I don't know what the lady's name was. Let's say Smith, Mrs. Smith. And she came out on the balcony and said, yeah, what can I do for you? And he said, this man wants to stay here in your house if you don't have any children staying right now as students. And he doesn't have much money. And so she got a contract with me. She said, okay, you can stay here, but you'll even have to sleep with my 19-year-old daughter. I thought, that's a trap. Or with my 4 little boys. And I thought, that will be uncomfortable, but I handled that. And so I accepted to sleep in a bed. I guess it was what you'd call a double bed, not a king size or queen size, with 4 little bitty boys, and the smallest one peed on me every night. Bless his heart. And the older ones got out of bed and unpacked my suitcase for me every night. But I stayed there and went about my business. And you know what happened? I needed brochures to advertise what I was going to do in the park there in the city. And so I went down to the opposition party and I said, I've been kind of categorized as somebody non grata, not presentable to be brought here and preach the gospel in the park. They don't like what I'm preaching in the air, and I'm just preaching the gospel, but it kind of clashed with some of their religious views. And the prime minister was the Seventh-day Adventist, so he didn't want to see me there. And they kind of told immigration not to let me in. As a matter of fact, when I got to the immigration, the guy asked me, as he looked at my passport, he said, Robert Brown, are you Bob Brown, one of the preachers on the air? I said, yes, sir. And I figured, well, I'm out of here. And he looked at it and looked at it, thought about it, looked at me, looked back down, and then he stamped it and said, bam, my mom loves your program. She listens to it every day at 3:15 on the radio. Have a good time here in St. Kitts. And so I got in, and then I got this place to stay and sleep and all this sort of thing. But those little boys got out with their 19-year-old sister even, and helped me hand out handbills that the opposition party printed for me, in which I didn't say anything about politics. I just said I was going to be preaching in the park that night. And by the way, I got one of the ministers of government to loan me the prime minister, who was the Seventh-day Adventist, his equipment. And so hard equipment, it was a mess. But you know, what was really nice is that that woman and her little kids all came to love me, and they treated me really well. And I was only supposed to get a piece of toast and an egg every day. That was my allotment on the amount of money I was given. And they did a lot more than that. And the kids got out with me and handed out handbills all over St. Kitts. And we had a good crowd and baptized some wonderful people. Started a great church. It's still just rolling right now. Last time I heard that, about 300 members. And I haven't been back since that first visit. But I had a family that they weren't even Christians, as we consider people to be Christians. And they gave me way more than I expected. Did so much for me by the grace of God. But that family, I think, was blessed by my presence, and I certainly was blessed by them. And sometimes when you go in town like these guys did, and you're the disciples of Jesus, you're coming into town, you're a Jew among Jews, and you're asking, okay, now can I stay here? And somebody says, you're a man of God, you can stay in my house as long as you want to. But then if they rejected these disciples of Jesus, he says, just kick the dust off your garments and off the bottom of your sandals and just keep marching on until you find somebody that wants to be good to you. A family where God's law is respected, where God's will is appreciated. That's where you need to spend the night. And so that's what they did. They didn't go with money. They just went with a mission, with a goal, with an idea. And God put the people there to take care of them. And then in Acts 16, the Apostle Paul is now converted after his experience with Jesus and set out on the first missionary journey. Now he's on the second missionary journey. He comes to the city of Philippi, and he has some of these same characteristics that I had, a little bit off the rocker, maybe, to ask people to do all kinds of crazy things for him. But he has faith in God and faith in people. And so we read in Acts 16, 12, and 13, and then we'll continue after that. From there, he traveled to Philippi, a Roman colony and the leading city of that district of Macedonia, an important town. And we stayed there several days. On the Sabbath, we went outside the city gate to the river, where he expected to find a place of prayer. It looked like this is where people have been praying. So let's come out here on the Sabbath, which is the day the Jews definitely worship and serve God. And so let's go back down to the river and see if we can find somebody that'll let us preach to them. And we're expected to find a place of prayer. And it was. He sat down and began to speak to the women who had gathered there. A group of women were there. One of those listening was a woman from the city of Thyatira named Lydia, a dealer in purple cloth. That means she had some money as well, because the dye that was used to turn wool or cotton or whatever they had from which the garment had been made into a purple garment, a royal color, was a very expensive dye taken from a shellfish found off the coast of Tyre, and there were very few of those shellfish in the world. And they would squeeze them and get maybe a drop out of each one, and people had to dive to get those shells. So it was a very expensive cloth, not because of the cloth itself, the material, but because of the dye and the color. And it was beautiful. And so she was a dealer in that. She probably wasn't, getting those garments on consignment. She was having to buy them and then resell them. She was a worshiper of God. She believed in God. She worshiped God. And that's why she came down to the river to pray with the other women. So they were all there together. And it says, the Lord opened her heart to respond to Paul's message. She liked what she heard. She understood it. And with God's guidance, she became a Christian, because it says, when she and the members of her household, and that's what I'm really underscoring today, that family concept, her household were baptized. She invited us to her home. Another fact, she invited us to her home. So her family became Christians, not just her, but her family. Others believed as well. And then they invited him to their house. If you consider me a believer in the Lord, she said, come and stay at my house. And she persuaded us. She was insistent. I want you to stay with us. I want you to come to my house and hang out there, do whatever you got to do in Philippi. But I want my family to have you in their midst. And I want them to hear what you have told me. And I want all of them to be edified, because you're a servant of God. What a decision. And then in Acts 18, Paul has moved on. He's gone from Philippi, which is up on the top of the Aegean Sea, down to the city of Corinth. And after this, Paul left Athens, where he intermediate stopped, and went to Corinth. There he met a Jew named Aquila, a native of Pontus, who had recently come from Italy with his wife Priscilla, because Claudius, the emperor, had ordered all Jews to leave Rome, get out. And they had to leave. Rome was their home, but they were living in Corinth now because that was what they were forced to do by the government. Paul went to see them. And because he was a tent maker, which we learned something about Paul when we get to that verse that we didn't know before, that this scholar amongst the Jewish people was also a tent maker. He had a job somewhere before and learned how to make tents. And we're talking about tents you could live in. We're talking about the tents of the Far East. And so he went to see them, and because he was a tent maker, as they were, he stayed and worked with them. And I think that the implication here is that he moved in with them. He stayed with them and worked with them. They just took him in as one of their employees, but also as a resident in their house. You can live with us. You can eat with us. And you can work with us. And so he did. And they became Christians and became very, very faithful Christians. Priscilla and Aquila are mentioned all through the New Testament, because when Paul was there, he not only made tents with them, he built a strong church in Corinth, and that continued on forever. And so, and we read in 1 Corinthians 16:19, the churches in the province of Asia, where that city was found, send you greetings. Aquila and Priscilla greet you warmly in the Lord, and so does the church that meets at their house. They moved out of Corinth later because they converted some people there that were able to carry on, and then Apollos, who we're going to talk about in a minute, who they converted, was able to come and take their place, and so they went on to Ephesus even. And so the churches in all of Asia got to know Priscilla and Aquila, and in Ephesus they met in the home of these two people. And so Apollos, who I mentioned, came to that city preaching, but he was preaching the baptism of John the Baptist, which was different from the baptism of Christ. It was an earlier edition of baptism that had a different purpose than that of Christian baptism. And people were being baptized, repenting, getting ready for the coming kingdom, which is the church. And it was already there, so they were a little behind the times there. This preacher was not up to date on what was taking place, that Jesus had come and died on the cross, and now Christian baptism was being practiced, not just a preparatory baptism that would get you ready for the coming of Jesus. Jesus is already in heaven, back home with his Father. And so a different baptism was being preached. And so they converted him. And then he was able to carry on later in the city of Ephesus. So these people who had been converted to Paul were converting other people, moving to another town, converting one of the young men that came there, preaching the baptism of John, and started a whole new movement. And then we read in Romans 16, 3-5. Remember, they were from Rome originally. Well, they're back home. Claudius is dead. He's dead and gone. And so they're back home. Greet Priscilla and Aquila, my co-workers in Jesus Christ. They risked their lives for me. Not only I, but all the churches of the Gentiles, all the churches of Asia Minor are grateful to them. All the churches of Asia Minor are grateful to them. They did an incredible work, Corinth, Ephesus, and then converting somebody like Apollos. We start preaching the truth and cover a massive territory. So all these Christians that are found out there amongst the Gentiles in the area known as Asia Minor, they all are very grateful. So, well, read also the church that meets where? At their house. Everywhere they go, it seems, they have a church meeting in their house. And now, where are they now, according to what we're reading? They're in Rome. They're back home. And they've got a church meeting there in their home. They had a church meeting in their home when they were down in Ephesus and probably over in Corinth. They were the key figures there, so they probably hosted the church in that town. And it reminds me of a situation right here in Denver. I came into town and I found out that about 14% of the population were Latin Americans. And we didn't have a single member of the church. We didn't have a single congregation where you could go and worship in Spanish. And a lot of people were coming in, immigrants and so forth. And so I put an ad in one of the local newspapers here in Denver asking if you're a member of the Church of Christ, that they said at least, and you live here in Denver and you don't have a place to worship, please get in touch with me and let my telephone number and an address. And I started getting contacts. The first contact, though, came from Josefina. And Josefina said she'd like for us to come to her house and talk to her. So I took Michelle Gall, who was working with us at that time here, and we went together. Since it was a lady, I wanted to take a sister with me. And so I took Michelle and we sat down in her living room and we talked to her about the gospel. She knew exactly what she had done and who she was and what the church was about and what, you know, how you can become a Christian. And she had it all. She understood it. Her husband had been a preacher, but had really lost his faith due to alcohol. It was a problem in his family. It was a problem he had had as a youth, and he was unfaithful to her. And so she just gave up and came to the United States of America. That seems to be where everybody wants to come. And so she was here in Denver and didn't know there was a congregation where she could worship. And I said, yeah, there are members of the Church of Christ right here that were Spanish speaking. We'd be happy to have you worship with us. And she said, well, now exactly where is the church? And I knew what she meant. What is your name? The building, the address. And I said, well, coincidentally, it's right here. You probably could give me the address. It's your living room. That's where the Church of Christ, the Iglesia de Cristo, meets in Denver, Colorado. It's right here in your living room. Because you're the first member that we've contacted, and we're glad to be with you. And I'll be coming here for services on Sunday morning. Look forward to seeing you at church. And so Josefina is a faithful Christian even to this day. She's a faithful Christian. She worships down in Inglewood with us, and there's a large congregation down in the Northwest as well. And we used to have one over off of Milwaukee Street. And, we've got a good movement. We got some members down in Colorado Springs now. Roberto Baptist drives up every Sunday to be with us. I'll see him today about 1:30. And so it's going great. But it all started in her house. And it was because she and her kids had all come up in the truth. And so that's how we find people meeting in homes. We just tell them this is where the church meets. And then in 3 John verse 8, we read, we ought therefore to show hospitality to such people so that we may work together for the truth. One of the things that happened was in Paul's journey, one of the converts, another very faithful brother, Gaius, was converted. And when John sent out missionaries to go and work in a certain area, there were people in the congregation that didn't want to work with him, didn't want to receive him, didn't want to have them in their home. And they rejected it. They closed their door to these people that John the apostle had sent. But then we get this letter from the apostle John saying that's not right. And he commends Gaius because he has said, well, I'll receive them. That if they're emissaries with John and they're here to preach the gospel, sure, they can stay with me. And so that he commends him for his hospitality. And the word hospitality in the Greek has, you've heard of xenophobia, afraid of strangers. Well, it's just the opposite. The xeno is still there, but it's a love for strangers, not a resentment or a fear of strangers. And so hospitality is saying, yeah, my house is your house, as they say in Latin America. Casa es tu casa. And so that's what happened with Gaius. And then the apostle John writes to him and says, hey, good job. Appreciate you doing that. And so his family was open to being servants, and they were hospitable. And then we read in Revelation 3:20, here I am, the Lord says, I stand at the door and knock. If anyone hears my voice and opens the door, I will come in, eat with that person, and they with me. It's interesting. Imagine Jesus standing at your door, knocking, and wondering, should I answer? What will it mean? What significance will it have for me? What obligations will it present? And Jesus is still saying, if you hear my voice, you know it's me. Hey, it's me. And you open the door, I will come in and I will eat with that person and they with me. And so God's saying, I want you to show some hospitality toward me. I want you to receive me as though I were a stranger coming in the night, knocking on your door and calling for admission. And so as we think about our church, and I think about the families we have, I think about my family, and it's pretty big, and we think about the grandchildren that are faithful. Alice is going to graduate from high school next week. And you see all of the joy that's here, and you see the children, grandchildren, and Teresa's here, and I know she was proud about that reading this morning, as her grandchild does, is reading for us to hear. And it's just great to see how God works through families. But then I was talking to Kelly, and she asked, what are you going to preach on Sunday? She always does that. Sometimes she gives me a real headache. What are you going to preach on Sunday? And I said, well, this is what I'm going to be preaching. And she says, but that's not good. I said, why is it not good? She said, there's a lot of single people there, and we do have some, don't we, Brett? Yeah. And I think most of them are out running around the country somewhere today. But we've got young people who haven't gotten married yet. They're in a family, but they don't have their own family. And she says, what about the singles? And I said, yeah, and what about the widows, right, Teresa? Had a husband, but God took him home early. And so what about them? They can't say, me, my wife, or my husband, and all of our children, we're all faithful to the Lord. No, but there is also something that you need to think about, and that is that Mary and Martha and Lazarus, as far as we know, were singles, and there were widows in the scriptures mentioned many times. There were a lot of singles who also were thrilled to be in the family of God, to be children of God, even if they didn't have a massive, immediate family of offsprings. And God wants us to be faithful in his family. And we look at the people that were doing a wonderful job in the first century, the Apostle Paul, who could ever imagine anybody working more, doing more, accomplishing more than him. And he, according to 1 Corinthians chapter 9, said, I could have been married. I could have been like Peter and had a wife, so that we know Peter did have a wife. And he says, I could have chosen a woman to be my wife and had a family and had offspring, had children, male and female. But I chose not to for the gospel's sake, so he could be free and run around. That's what Kelly used to always say when I was on the mission field and having to travel a lot. She said, remember, you made a decision to be a Peter, not a Paul. And so you can't just be always gone. You got to be at home. And that's true. That was absolutely right. But, you know, as you think about whether you're single, whether you're married, or whether you're a widower or widow, whatever, or just not married yet, whatever the circumstances may be, you have a family. You have a family right here, don't you? That's right. We're a family. And that's why Zooming is good. And I'm glad that those of you that are having the Zoom today are listening and watching and learning. And yet at the same time, it's such a blessing to be able to come and sit here in this room and see each other and hug each other's necks. Court and Amanda are back. The boys, you know, were exposed to COVID, and they got COVID, and they all were sick a little bit, not too bad, fortunately. And now they're all back. And I'll guarantee you, if you ask them, they'll tell you what Amanda did this morning. Oh, it's just so wonderful to be back. And it really is. It really is. I mean, you can go on TV any day and see 15 programs that will edify you, biblically speaking, but it's not the same as being with your family, God's family. And it's a blessing to be a child of God, and a blessing to be a part of this family. And I'm so excited that I am, thrilled that my kids are, and I'm thankful that they're faithful to the Lord, and that's what is necessary. That's what we all have to strive for. And so it's a wonderful thing. And the churches of Christ salute you. We read about all these salutations, Romans. Well, the church here, your family, also is glad to see you as much as you're glad to see the church. And we're thankful for our visitors that have been here only a few Sundays and so forth, that you're in. You know, it's like one media back there was asking what you had to do to be a member of our congregation. I said, well, you showed up. I guess that makes it, you're in. And so we're glad to have Rick, Heidi, and the kids. And we're hoping